And I also want to thank each and every one of you, not only for coming out tonight, but for your continued dedication to erasing the stigma surrounding mental illness. Without all of you and everyone out in our community, Farmington Safe would not have the standing we have today. And so for that, I thank you. Is there anyone in the audience that has never been to a Farmington Safe event before, just by a quick show of hands? Okay, excellent. Thank you for coming out. We always love seeing new faces. And I know Anna talked a little bit about what Farmington Safe is, and I want to just further that a little bit. We are a suicide prevention task force, and what we do, we have community conversations such as this. We host fundraisers, and we are just out in the community raising awareness for suicide prevention. And we also aim at ending the stigma surrounding mental illness so that others can share their feelings and share their struggles openly and not feel ashamed. One of the upcoming community events we have other than this is we have a walk in honor of Rachel Reynolds that is going to be held this Sunday at 3 p.m. at Heritage Park. And if any of you would like to join us, that would be great. It's going to be a great event. Now, as I mentioned before, we are a suicide prevention task force. So it may seem a little strange that we're hosting an event that focuses on the loss of a loved one. We realize that unfortunately this traumatic experience and this traumatic event is going to happen to people in our community. As much as we want to prevent every suicide from happening, it's going to happen in our community, and we realize that. And after losing a loved one, many questions arise. How do I proceed? What can I do to live? Can I even go on? When I lost a loved one, I had many coping mechanisms in place from therapy, so I was able to deal with this very well. Unfortunately, not everybody has this experience. Many people go into losing a loved one without any previous experience with therapy or any encounter with mental illness. And so it's important that we host events like this so that you can hear stories of how people have survived, how people have lived on past the loss of a loved one. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to make a quick note, a little warning. The stories the panelists are going to share, they're going to be emotional. They may bring up some emotions and some memories that you've been holding on to for a long time and maybe haven't experienced. Those emotions and those memories are okay. It's okay to feel those. But instead of focusing on those memories and those feelings, I would like you to instead focus on the overall message of survival that our panelists are going to share with you. That is that you can live past a loss, and that it is okay to be happy after losing a loved one. Not immediately, but down the road, it's okay to feel happy and regular emotions without feeling guilt. And if those emotions move you too much, and if for any reason it's necessary, we do have mental health professionals with us today that you can speak with after the event. We have Bridget Lynch, who is on our panel. She will be available afterwards to not only answer questions, but also to hear your stories. And we also have Anna Kassar, who you heard from first. Those two individuals are mental health professionals that can hear your stories and go from there. So I would like to begin introducing the panelists. The panelist closest to me is Stephanie Prechter. Stephanie earned her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Georgetown University. Following graduation, she worked as a political appointee at the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the Foreign Agriculture Service. Stephanie transitioned home a few years later to work with the bipolar research team at the University of Michigan. Since then, she has been involved with suicide prevention outreach on both a local and a state level. In addition to her work with her family's foundation, Stephanie is active as board chair for Fresh Start Clubhouse, and she is currently taking classes in photography. To Stephanie's right, we have Bridget Lynch, who I briefly mentioned earlier. She is a licensed professional counselor and the grief counselor for Lynch & Sons and Schrader Howell Funeral Homes. She is on the board of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and has a private practice in Beverly Hills. Bridget facilitates several grief support groups, including a group for survivors of suicide loss in Farmington Hills. Our next panelist is Molly Green. Molly Green is a suicide prevention advocate. It's been 5 years since the death of her husband, Michael. 5 years ago, she not only lost her husband, but she lost the father of her 4 children, her home, her financial security, her identity, as well as the path she was forging for her family. And to make the struggles worse, she was left without a life insurance policy. Since then, with countless hours of therapy for her and her children and endless family support, Molly has replanted her family into a different life where she continues to rebuild with her main goal to raise healthy, mentally stable, open-minded, and confident children. She believes that by allowing herself to recognize her pain and anger, she has become militant and out to demonstrate that although his actions took away the life they once knew and loved, it was not going to define them. Rather, it was going to transform them into fierce survivors who have conviction, trust, and a passion for living. And our last panelist this evening is going to be Jim Adams. Jim is a suicide prevention advocate for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Jim's 18-year-old son, Morgan, was a freshman in college with a promising career in the music industry business. But what most people didn't know was that Morgan was silently suffering from depression. The disease took its toll in 2012 when Morgan died from suicide. Morgan was very outspoken about social justice, helping those in need. It is this legacy that Jim is trying to carry forward, to educate people about depression and suicide prevention, and it's the reason he joins us tonight. And just a quick word about the schedule. After I hand it over to our panelists, note cards will circulate. Many of you already have them. As Anna said, you can write any questions down that you have. If they're addressed to a specific panelist, write that down as well. And we will collect these and we will read your questions to the panelists. And like Anna said, if you didn't write down a question or if your question wasn't read for whatever reason, bring up that question. And the panelists will also be available afterwards in order to speak with you on a personal level. And after the question and answer session is complete, Ken Massey will close. We also have many resource tables that you can take a look at. We have Common Ground here tonight. St. Joseph Mercy Oakland and St. Mary Mercy Livonia Behavioral Medicine has a table out there. Farmington Safe, we have a table. Maple Grove has a table. The National Association for Mental Illness has a table as well. And the Michigan School of Professional Psychology has a presence here with Bridget Lynch, and they are going to provide some of the counseling support after the event. So without further ado, I would like to introduce, again, Stephanie Prechter.
Thank you. Let me just get this set up really quick. Oh, there we go. So thank you again for having me, and I really appreciate this idea of community conversation and pulling together resources and creating support for all of those impacted by the epidemic of suicide. It's an issue that's really close to my heart, and that's based on personal experience. Sorry. So when suicide hit us and my family in 2001, our entire universe was jolted. Our systems were shocked, our lives were forever shifted. At that time, I was 21, and my dad was 59. And in this picture, I'm 18. It was homecoming. So that's three years prior to his passing. This one instant forced me to look at the world in a whole new light. I approached faith in a different way, and I tried desperately to better understand purpose in the bigger picture. I developed sensitivity to language surrounding suicide and mental wellness. Prior to losing my dad, I never heard about suicide. Really, it never impacted me personally. I never understood depression. I never really considered mental health. I learned that the value of life is priceless. The idea of suicide should never be taken lightly. This is something I want to emphasize. Most times when I'm talking with someone in this space, and they're struggling and they want help, I say to them that suicide is not an option. It's off the table. And I realize that there's ideas and there's notions and there's struggle and there's emotional strife. But again, I don't want to give permission for that. And I would never want for someone to believe that it's a choice. It is not a choice. I managed to navigate the world without my dad as a physical part of it. My dad's passing also challenged me to find an identity outside of the life that he created for us while still honoring his legacy and his spirit. Initial reactions from my family were varied. My mom jumped in into the cause without hesitation. She dedicated her focus to bipolar research, which is housed at the University of Michigan. My dad had been diagnosed with bipolar, but this was something that was going untreated. And so since then, she's put in place longitudinal study, and tons of efforts are going forth, and I urge you to look up University of Michigan bipolar research. My brother, he reacted with anger and confusion, and both him and my mom were there when all of this happened, and I don't think, to this day, he has a lot of problems just really even speaking up about it. As for myself, I was in a state of shock for a good while before I started processing it. For the longest time, I was obsessed with having my dad with me in some form. I wore his wedding ring around my neck. I created videos and website for him and memories of him, and I looked for every opportunity to share bits and pieces of him. And I really didn't want for him to be remembered as someone who died by suicide. And again, it might have to do with the stigma around it. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't something that he, decided to do one day. This was an illness that took his life. So I just want to give you a peek into some of the footage. And incidentally, I really haven't looked at it for a while. This is a little video.
Dear, how are you doing?
Good.
You enjoying yourself?
Yeah.
Let's dance in style, let's dance for a while. Heaven can wait, we're only watching the skies. Hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. Are you gonna drop the bomb or not? Let us die young or let us live forever. We don't have the power, but we never say never. Sitting in a sandpit, life is a short trip. The music's for the sad man. Can you imagine when this race is won? Turn our golden faces into the sun. Praising our leaders, we're getting in tune. The music's played by the madman. Forever young, I want to be forever young.
So my dad had a full life. And this past July marked 14 years since his passing. He now has 3 beautiful granddaughters. And I think that's one of the hardest things is when I look at my nieces and I kind of envision him being here. I know he would have been so proud to see them grow up. So he has all of us, and we pray that he's with us every step of the way. The power of his spirit reminds us to make a difference in the lives of others every day. That was his mantra that we live by. Regardless of the way in which death happens, I don't think grief has a stopping point. It's a journey with constant waves washing over us. A marked difference with a death by suicide lies with the questions. Why did this happen? Can we prevent it? Is there any hope for those suffering? Looking back, I wish I could have said something to alter my dad's fate. I know I tried to share my own experience with depression. I shared my recovery with him. I reminded him that there is a light. But I also understood that that light was something he needed to see firsthand. When someone is in the throes of internal torture, and it's a feat to convince them that there is a future and that things will eventually work themselves out, the answers we have today in the way of meds and treatment are insufficient. It requires us to do more for ourselves in the way of self-awareness and assessment and balance that with a strong support network. I also think that it's important to repeatedly emphasize the value of life and for each and every one of us to enforce that in every day. So I'm going to transition to building resilience. Resilience is one of my favorite words. This term, along with compassion, creativity, connection, and empowerment, combine to offer us a foundation. And you all hear every day to have healthy habits and establish boundaries and practice gratitude, find your gifts, step out of perfection, learning to love yourself, breathing, meditation, spending time in nature, create, express. This all might sound trite, but these are all ways in which you can nurture yourself and build your foundation. And I believe build a barrier against whatever it is that may show up in the future. So those are all just different tips and different things that I've used to sort of, I don't want to say recover in years past, but definitely to help me maintain. And then finally, because I know we're going to have questions at the end, I wanted to leave you with this quote. I had found it the other day, and it really means a lot to me. It says, "Promise me you will not spend so much time treading water and trying to keep your head above the waves that you forget how much you've always loved to swim." And it reminds me of my dad a bit, because he always loved to swim in the ocean, and he would always put his head down, and he would always dive in and just submerge himself and really enjoy that moment. So I know if he was with us today, and he is in many ways, he would remind each of us that we have to enjoy the swim. So thank you.
My name is Bridget, and I want to talk to you a little bit about coping mechanisms and what you can do at this point. I run support groups. I work with families that have suffered the loss of someone who has died by suicide. And everything I know, I have learned from those people. So everyone who has shared with me, I thank them. I appreciate it. Some things that I have found pretty consistent with many of the families who've had someone die by suicide is the great questions of why and what could have been done and how do we go on living with that question. And there's no real answer to that. It is a question that people basically need to learn to live with. And some people are more successful at that than others. Unfortunately, with suicide, the only person that really knows why is not here to ask. So that is a struggle that so many people that I work with have and have shared with me. I do know that everyone's grief is different. So where some people might concentrate on one aspect of their loved one's death, other ones might concentrate on something else. Some people may want to talk a lot, want to express their emotions a lot. Other people may not. Some people will move through the grieving process at a different pace than others. And so what I always tell the people that I work with is to, first and foremost, be kind to yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Don't judge yourself. You know, there's a lot of people out there that will have ideas of what should happen, where you should be, when you should get over things. They'll say the most amazing things. And so what I want to do is to encourage all of you to just know that you are exactly where you need to be, that what you are feeling are emotions, and that's what they are. They're not right or wrong, they're just yours. And so often we criticize ourselves for that, and we judge ourselves for that. And I just encourage you all to, it sounds strange, but embrace those emotions. Look at them, talk about them, feel them. Some of the things that I have heard people tell me that they've done and that I encourage others to do is kind of find a safe place. And I don't necessarily mean a place, I mean maybe a safe person, a safe environment that you can go to. Maybe it's a community, maybe it's a person, maybe it's a couple of people. You will find, at least those that have shared with me have found, that there are some people that have surprised them in their grief, really been there for them. in ways that they didn't expect. And then there's other people who they would have thought were going to be there and they don't show up. And so in that, I want to encourage all of you to do what you need to do for you. You get to be selfish for a little while, although selfish gives a bad name, it sounds bad. But I mean, it's up to you to give yourself your own self-care. And so you might have to go through some people that aren't necessarily healthy in your life anymore. And you might find that there are other people that surprise you and become part of your life. I would encourage you to embrace that as much as possible. Some things I like to just tell people so that they don't feel like they're going crazy, because I've had people come to me and say, I feel like I'm going crazy. A very normal part of the grieving process is to be fatigued, is to be tired, to not to be able to concentrate, to lack motivation, to have changes in sleep habits and eating habits. And your emotions will be really all over the place. That you can have, it's strange, but, how can you feel, okay one moment and sad the next, or okay and sad at the same time? It doesn't seem like that would happen, but it does. So keep in mind that your emotions will be all over the place, and again, just embrace them as best you can. Stephanie commented on a lot of the self-care, but exercise, eating healthy, getting as much sleep as you're able to get, that's very important. Journaling is very helpful. It's something that I recommend to pretty much everyone that I meet with. And finding your support system and talking as much as you can possibly tolerate. Try to talk about it with people. Come to a group. There's a few groups in our area that we'll tell you about, and go to individual counseling. Find a priest or a rabbi or a clergy person you can confide in. Maybe it's a best friend. Find someone that you can talk to. And you don't have to worry about them getting sick of hearing you talk about it, because you will be talking about it for a long time. This is a lot to adjust to, and you will not be able to get over it or really even get through it. Is tough for me, I think. I think the best description is to learn to live with it. And it takes a lot of time, and it's a different amount of time for everyone. So I just wanted to be able to share with you some of the things that people have shared with me. And I do want people to know that we do have the support group here in Farmington Hills. Meets, I think we've got some information out back about it. So if you're interested in that, we also have, Common Ground has a support group as well, and we tried to alter the days so that if you want to go more than a couple times a month, you can. And if there's any questions or anything that you want to ask me at the end, you're welcome to do so. But really, this is more about all of you folks who can share your personal experience. These are the people that really know. So thanks.
Well, I am so not as prepared as Stephanie with slides or anything like that. But listening to Stephanie, having her father pass away, having it be my husband and his son, just really emphasizes how different the process is, how different the healing is, how different the emotions are. The word is anger. That's obviously where I came from, being a wife and a partner, and having that happen to me. I felt incredibly betrayed and incredibly angry. I have these 4 babies, and he didn't think he could handle it. Why did you think I could? So that's where I came from as that wife. I can't speak obviously as having a son or daughter or a father, but I like to use the word fierce instead of anger, because anger is such a negative word, and you can let anger take over you. But if you're fierce, you can still use that anger. And that's kind of how I think I handle it. I use that to kind of say, oh, really? You think that this is going to take us down? It's not going to take us down. I use it like that. Like, I'm gonna do everything I can. I can get counseling. I'm going to do support groups. I'll do whatever we can to get us through this so we can be the survivors. And I wasn't sure how to prepare for tonight, but Luke told me that it might be good to talk about what I've done for the kids or with the kids. So I sat down with them tonight and I asked them before I came. I said, well, what would you suggest to any other children or any other people? What did mommy do? What did we do that has gotten us where we are today? And believe me, we have a long way to go still. But it's interesting, the different answers. My oldest said, well, it's the honesty, Mom. You were honest. And I was. From the very beginning, I was completely honest. As far as I'm concerned, there is absolutely no other option. If you're not honest, they're going to find out some way. They'll find out some way, somehow. A child at school had mentioned it to my daughter. And, I mean, who knew that the parents were telling those children? So it will come out. It will definitely come out. So honesty is the main thing. And, I mean, I was honest. Details, obviously, aren't necessary all the time, but I answered the questions. So the honesty is definitely an important thing to maintain. The next was counseling. My other child said, counseling, Mom. And then the other ones are saying, don't tell kids to go to counseling. That's ridiculous. I hated going to counseling. And they do. They hate it. But you put them in the car and you take them, and you talk about it. And it does help. And I went to the U of M Center, and my children also participated in the bipolar study. Because I don't know if my husband had bipolar, manic, I have no idea. But I'd like to participate in those kind of studies to find out, again, honesty and openness. But the counseling is crucial. And I went to a counselor. I think finding the right counselor, and I went to a counselor that was phenomenal. She sat and talked to the children about the physical, the true facts about what happens in the brain, instead of necessarily all the, well, how do you feel, or how does that make you feel? My children needed to understand what an illness is. I even needed to understand it, because again, I was fierce. And I thought, forget it, this is ridiculous. He wasn't sick. But then when she explained how this happens, and I think it helped the children. So I think finding the right kind of counselor, there's time, obviously, for the how do you feel, how does it make you feel. But I think understanding it is crucial, especially for children. And then they can then feel like they're educated and knowledgeable about the sickness, the illness. And then my other one said, humor. Mom, you still keep your sense of humor. And what I took that as is, as hard as it was, I was myself. I tried to be myself. I tried to make sure we still lived. And you want to crawl in a hole, you want to crawl in bed, and I did. But I had 4 children that needed me and needed to know that there was no way we were going to go down. This was not going to take us down. This was not going to define us. This was not going to be the end of our story. And so when she said humor, I found that really interesting, because that meant I didn't lose myself. You can't lose yourself. You have to still find that one part of you that you can cling to. Not that I felt funny, I didn't, but you have to find that. And then the 4th said, well, Mom, when you went in that documentary and you talked about it, and then you talked about it, and then you talked about it, and then all we ever heard is you talk about it. And I think that was my healing point too, is to constantly talk about it. It doesn't desensitize you, but it becomes part of your story, but you have control over that story. I felt that sharing it and talking about it brought it out in the open. There were no secrets. There was no, I felt like I was taking away the stigma, because I owned the story. I I felt like it diffused a lot, and people weren't uncomfortable around us, and then the kids could talk openly about it, and there was nothing hidden. So I find that that a really big part is, like you were saying, talk about it. I don't think you can, obviously I talk a lot, but you can't talk enough about it. You really need to express your emotions. And going back to the anger part, or the fierceness, I think as we experience the loss, we're afraid to say we're angry. I think that it kind of feels like you're condemning the person that committed suicide. You're supposed to be angry. It's maddening. You're furious. You're mad for so many reasons. You're mad because they didn't tell you that they were feeling this way. You're mad because you feel betrayed. You're mad because you didn't see the signs. You're mad at everything. And then it changes to all different emotions. But I think to say, when people say, oh, I'm not angry, I think it's a bunch of baloney, because you have to have some type of that feeling in order to go on to the next step. You have to go through each step. You cannot get to the other side unless you go through the whole road. So I think to allow yourself to be angry or fierce is huge. And the one thing that I think also is the hardest part, and the part that I still will always struggle with and constantly struggle with, is maintaining a balance with my children. And a balance between the memory and in the mind of the children, the goodness that my husband had, and the wonderful, funny, amazing, great dad and man and husband and brother, and not to have them identify with the heinous act that he committed. So that is a really tough balance, and you always have to be going through that, because you can't let the kids think that it's hard to say, oh, you remind me so much of your daddy, because then you're concerned, because then you're saying that, you might have some of your daddy's characteristics. Well, they do. So it's a hard balance. It's a hard balance, but it's incredibly important to constantly have that on your mind, because they do need to know both those factors. So my whole thing is, I didn't sing. I sang in the car all the time. And when he passed away, I remember thinking I didn't want to sing. I didn't want to roll down the windows, and I didn't want to sing and scream my songs. And then it was one day, I think it was probably 2 years, unfortunately, that I remember rolling down the windows and singing really loud. And just so you know that you will sing. You will sing one day, and you will sing loud, and you'll be really happy one day at moments, and then other moments you'll go through other emotions, but you will sing. That's my thing.
So I'm still new at this. It'll be 3 years in November since my son Morgan died. After losing a loved one to suicide, each one of us goes through our own journey, and that journey is a very, very unique one. But there are parts, despite that uniqueness, where our paths will cross, our experiences will cross. And so I really just want to share a portion of my journey that I've gone on. Shortly after Morgan's funeral, I had to go to Chicago, drive to Chicago to collect his belongings from his dorm room. Now, I had friends who were saying, we'll do it, don't, that's too much for you, don't do it. Or, I said, no, I've got to do this. This is something I have to do. And the big reason was, and Bridget touched on this, was I had to have a question answered. I needed to know, what was that one reason that my son went to such an extreme as suicide? I had to find out. So I got to Chicago, and in his dorm room, packed up his clothes and his books. I packed up everything, all the way down to the wadded up paper in the trash cans. I wanted it all, as if this were some type of, evidence, and I was the lone detective who was going to find that one reason, that clue that caused this fatal decision of his. So when I got home, I started going through all this stuff. I went through every page of every notebook, every book, every paper, and it's amazing, just after 3 months of college, what a freshman in college can write in papers. But I read every single word of every paper, thinking that I might find something hidden in that. And then I went through his computer, thinking, okay, social media. Maybe he received something from somebody, or a post to somebody. Went through all of his social media posts, files on his computer, emails, everything. I didn't find what I was looking for. So what did I do? I started over again, and I did it again and again and again, because I knew somewhere it was there. Well, what eventually was happening is I was finding myself spiraling down into what I now know is called situational depression. Thank God for my wife, who said, "You need help. You need to find somebody that can help you through this." So what's the first thing I do? It's like, yeah, a professional. A professional's gonna be able to look at all this, and that person's gonna be able to tell me what is that one reason. So I'm like, of course we'll do this. Well, fortunately, that's not what happened. Fortunately, I was educated, and I've met others who've gone through similar situations as myself, and was educated through them about suicide and about depression. And I think this is, for me, probably where the real journey began. One person in particular I met, some of you may know him, Jeff Edwards. He's the president of the local chapter of American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Jeff and his wife, Laura, lost their 12-year-old son, Chase, in 2003 to suicide. And it was Jeff who told me, explained to me what I was trying to do in finding that one reason. And he gave me this great analogy. It was very simple, but to me it was very powerful. And he said, imagine a dripping faucet in your kitchen sink. It's a leaky faucet, it's just dripping. And this kitchen sink is clogged. So what happens, it just keeps dripping and dripping, and eventually it fills up. And yeah, there is probably one drop that causes that sink to flood your kitchen. Well, here I was, trying to go through this flood to find that one drop, a drop that I never, ever would be able to find. Jeff was able to point out to me I wasn't seeing the obvious thing. There was a problem with the plumbing. This kitchen sink was clogged. My son had a disease, and the disease, that's the reason for his death, was the disease. I think we all go through facing life adversities. We can that drip. We all have that. We face adversities all the time, but for the majority of us, we know how to process that. That sink isn't clogged, or if it does, we know how to unclog it. For my son, he didn't know how, and for him, he kept quiet about it. He was silent, and it wasn't until probably about 3 weeks before his death that one of his friends told us that he was seriously suffering depression, and we quickly tried to get him into help. But it was one of those things that just really, really, to me, was very detrimental as far as, what am I doing? My son's not here anymore. But at the same time, after going through the therapy, the counseling, I think it put me in a much better place. So my advice to all of you is, don't try to find that one thing. It doesn't exist. Accept it for what it is. It's an illness. And for my son, it was depression. That was the disease. The symptom was suicide. Now, the big thing here is, it's a symptom that can be avoided. And I think some of the statistics are is that 90% could be avoided in these cases. And if we are able to educate people, we're able to break the stigma, I think we can lower those numbers of people who are dying by suicide. I learned of Molly's story, and she didn't even mention it there was a documentary that about her story. And it wasn't that long after Morgan had died when I saw this documentary. And I was really moved by the people in this who've gone through such tragedy and were able to move to that next step. And the film is called Transforming Loss. And I could tell that I had this gut feeling inside me that I needed to do something. You know, I couldn't just stay here in this state I was in. I had to transform my own loss. And so I tried to start figuring out ways to do it. Because before, I felt I was suffocating. And I think one of you mentioned as well, of this feeling of drowning you mentioned in the sea. Well, for me, it was like drowning in this big, vast cauldron that was slowly, the temperature was raising, and it was going to boil over if I couldn't find a way to get out of it. But I think what you will find if you act on that gut feeling of moving to that next step is that you will emerge from that cauldron of tragedy as a better version of yourself. Someone who's more aware of what's really important in life. You turn to find out you know what's important in life now. And you'll find yourself as more sensitive to those who might be suffering. And that's, if you can act on that, I think you can make a huge difference to a lot of people's lives. There will always be this huge hole in my heart that's my son, but I'm slowly finding ways to transform that loss, to move to that next step. And that's why I'm here tonight. Talking to you is part of my healing process, and I hope to continue it. Thank you.
At this time, if you did write a question down on your note card, could you pass it down towards Anna? And we'll start collecting those. Clearly, this was not easy for our panelists. It's a very emotional thing to talk about. So can we please give them another warm welcome, and thank you. It's a very brave thing to do, and we greatly appreciate it. Farmington Safe would like to extend our sincerest thanks to you guys. After having heard each one of the other panelists talk, is there anything else that anyone on the panel would like to say before we turn to the questions? You guys cover it pretty well.
I kind of wanted to mention something. Well, first of all, I've never met Molly, so it was a joy to meet her and not hear your story. So thank you. And I've known Jim for a little bit, but when you talked about finding that balance between having a dad and you grow up with him and you see him in this light, and then all of a sudden there's this tragedy and it surrounds his death, and then how do you convey that to the grandkids, or how, like, that balance. And I don't want to necessarily say that it was, and that it's that wording around suicide. And Jim and I have talked about that before about, like, I don't like saying commit, I like saying, like, he was a victim of suicide. But at the same time, obviously there's education that happens. But when you talked about that, that's something that I also struggle with. Because on one hand, I don't want him to be known for bipolar research and suicide and like all of this. I want him to be known for entrepreneurship and a visionary and a light in this world. But at the same time, there's that, so.
All those things they did throughout their life, all those amazing things.
Yeah.
Especially my little ones. My youngest was 3. She doesn't remember, and all those awesome, great things, and the reasons I fell in love with him, and the reasons that we built a life together. It's not that they're gone, but in those, you don't want that to be the only thing that they're known for.
Yeah.
Oh yes,
Right.
And that is, I have a hard time with that too, because I have to remind myself of the good things too sometimes. Again.
Yeah, and sorry to take up this time, but and also just, I know talking about it a lot, and I really wanted to come out and be, this suicide prevention advocate, and I talk about bipolar research, and I was diagnosed with bipolar, and so I talk about my situations and medications and hospitalizations and all this stuff. But I got to the point too where I was living it too much, and I was talking about it too much, and it was overflow. And so I had to really step back and say, okay, who am I without all of this? Because this is too much. So I just wanted to mention that.
Do you have any no cards?
I don't have any note cards, but I would like to offer the microphone to anybody who has a comment or questions or anything they might want to just share.
I had a question. I work with children, and I came a little late. I apologize. I was helping a neighbor, but it was a father, a husband, and a son. And it seems like it's mostly males. And they say that part of the problem is we don't get little boys to acknowledge their feelings. And myself as a teacher and working with kids, whenever I kind of do that, everybody kind of says, well, you're going to turn them into a sissy. I don't know if men could, maybe Jim could comment, like, should we be doing more of acknowledging feelings in boys?
Oh, I absolutely think so. I think boys especially aren't given the tool set in an early enough stage of their life to know when they get to a little bit older age of how to handle these adversities. And yes, I would wholeheartedly say give it to them. I mean, the whole, it's kind of an arcane, you turn them into a sissy. I don't think that's the case. I mean, we're talking about expressing emotions, but I would definitely do it.
I just want to comment on that too, Jim. One thing that I always mentioned to adult men is that they are responsible for modeling behavior to our young boys. And they take on that responsibility for all kinds of things, athletics and, you name it, they are, showing them what they should be doing. And with grieving, I really encourage it as well. And I don't mean just grieving, I mean mourning, and there's a difference. If you're grieving, everyone grieves. It's inside of you. You don't have a choice, it's there. But mourning is what would be considered the public display of your grief. So it's sharing it with other people. It's letting them know that this is what's going on for you. And so I always encourage and even challenge all of you men to teach our younger boys how to grieve. And that means talking about it, it means showing it, it means crying in front of them, telling them that you hurt. And I think that is going to be the most productive way of accomplishing that.
Yeah,
I can add
actually, that's
something.
very true, because that was my other son, who was 15 at the time. Morgan was 18, and met with Bridget, and I brought the comment of, well, I didn't want to cry in front of him because I didn't want him feeling bad for me. And Bridget probably like, well, why? And I'm like, what do you mean, why? But I think that's very true. It makes me realize now, as he should see that. He should see, I'm human. He's human, so that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I can just add a quick note for that as well. I went to an all-boys high school, so as you move through the grades, there was a slow progression. When we came in as freshmen, there was a lot of, if you saw someone crying, it's like, what are you doing, man? We're all together here, we're having a good time, what is that all about? And I was lucky enough in my sophomore year, we had what's called a challenge day, and it's a day-long program where you just talk about your feelings, it kind of works that in. And it was really great for us to see that, and it helped us grow as brothers, because we can see that it's okay to show emotion. And one of my favorite lines from that program was that crying is not a sign of weakness, as many people make it out to be, especially in men. If you're a man and you cry, what are you? That's what a lot of people say. It's actually a sign of recovery, that you're letting your emotions flow, you're letting yourself feel these emotions, and you're letting it bring you to tears, and that's not only an okay thing, that's a wonderful thing.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any comments or questions or anything?
Hi, my son died from suicide, so I'm familiar with that. But I also would like to hear what you have to say, because what I found is I'm familiar with my family's journey through our grief, but the impact in the community around my son's death, the impact on his friends, the people that knew him, that he worked, and to be honest, most people had no way, didn't know how to deal with that, and at the time, of course, we were grieving and weren't able to help very much. However, now that we've come a few years, to see some of them who are still struggling deeply at this loss. So beyond
How old was your son?
He was 22.
22, okay.
And it was 3 years ago. It was 2012. But just the ripple effect of a death to suicide beyond the immediate family grieving in the community.
Well, I'll comment on that. Part of that ripple effect is that people begin to think that if this happened here, it can happen outside of here. Like, if we talk about suicide, we're going to make someone do it. And that's a really hard thing to overcome. I've gone into schools after a suicide and done crisis intervention with the student body and with the parents and with the staff. And one of the biggest concerns of the parents is, if we let you in here to talk to our children about this, aren't they going to all start thinking about doing this themselves? And my comment to them is, they've probably already thought about it. So talk about it. And I kind of feel like that's what our responsibility is here. Those of us who have decided to get involved and work to prevent suicide, our job is to get that message out there, that this is not something that you can catch. This is not something that we can make someone do. This is something that many people think about, to what degree that varies, but many people think about, and part of what makes it become such a taboo thing is that nobody will talk about it. So we have to talk about it, and we have to keep talking about it. And so if you're worried about someone, don't dance around it. Are you thinking about this? Let's talk. Let's sit down. Let's talk. What have you thought about? Do you have any plans? We have to be really open and honest about it. And coming from the mental health field, we were talking about this becoming our loved one, the suicide kind of defining them and becoming that, and then defining us as suicide survivors. And one thing I just want to say, and I use this frequently, but to kind of bring home the point of, when someone dies from cancer, we are not ashamed of it. We don't, bury it in the words, and we're not careful how we talk about it. It's cancer, and people know, because they're familiar, that cancer often can kill. What we don't do with our mental health is kind of treat it like our body, like our physical health. And I really believe we need to start doing that we need to talk about mental health as openly as we talk about, diabetes and cancer and, getting all the various tests that we get. People will tell you they'll go get a colonoscopy before they'll tell you they've gone to their therapist, So that's my thing, is I would like for people to remember that it's not the suicide, it's the mental illness, it's the mental health. And so if somebody, like with your children, instead of it being so much about the suicide, it was Dad's mental illness. And that is what they will have to be careful of. And that's knowledge that they should have. But it's nothing to be ashamed of.
On that, I have had amazing experiences with the schools, good and bad. I've had parents call me and say, you know, I just wanted to let you know what your daughter said at the table. And my first questions are, well, what was asked? How did she respond? And that's teaching the language, because my kids are very well, they're very comfortable saying the story, but they also know that a lot of children don't know, so they don't, you know, come out and say the gun and things like that, unless the question was asked, well, how and what is suicide? But my littlest was 6 when she was asked, you know, are you going to the daddy-daughter dance? No, I'm not going. Well, why? Well, I don't have a dad. Well, why? Well, he passed away. Well, why? And so they're taught steps. You don't just throw it at them saying, well, he shot himself. You know, they are taught steps. And it is amazing how adults respond. Well, I didn't really want to tell my daughter. Well, I don't want that to be something that's brought in, my story to be brought into somebody else's home, to their children. I don't want that to be. But as a parent, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to have a conversation. And I think it's teaching that language to your kids. And my kids are not, they're not afraid of the story at all. So I think that's part of it.
One thing I would do as well with, as I do with my son's friends, I keep in contact with them. At first it was a little selfish on my part. I just wanted to have some contact with, but I realized it was helpful for them to keep in contact as well. One of his friends stopped by the house one day. I thought just, you know, for, hi, how are you? 4 hours later, he left. He just wanted to talk. And probably the biggest thing is making them aware there's not something they could have done, not something that they missed. You know, it was an illness. It just as, you know, like the cancer of, how would you know? I mean, how could you tell? You know, it's, people with depression especially are very, very good at hiding it. So there wasn't a chance that majority of my friends' sons would have known. So I would say keep in contact.
I hope it's okay that I take a moment. My husband and I spoke to Mr. Massey prior to this, and just wanted to clarify. My name is Rebecca Lombardo. My husband is Joseph, and I'm here to provide a different perspective on suicide. When I was 19, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I just turned 42 last year, so you can imagine it's been quite a journey. In 2008, I lost my mom to lung cancer, even though she hadn't had a cigarette in 21 years. We had a large family, 6 kids all together, and we were never the same again. I've never felt that kind of pain in my life, and I had no idea how to process it. In 2011, on March 23rd, my dad called me. What he told me made me buckle to my knees. My brother, Dana, was dead. He had been found brain dead in a hot tub with people none of the rest of us knew. The hospital called my dad to say he was gone. He was a lifelong alcoholic and had apparently started using cocaine as well. He was often depressed and miserable, so we have no idea if he did do it on purpose. I was never able to say goodbye. We hadn't spoken since the year before. While my mom was on her deathbed, I leaned over her and I promised her I would take care of the family, that everyone would be okay. It wasn't a lie, I tried, but I was feeling miserably. My husband and I had always had a happy marriage, but I haven't always been a happy person. The bipolar disorder was wreaking havoc on my life in 2013, and I decided to take my life. As someone that used self-injury as a coping mechanism, I always kept sharp instruments around as a security blanket. I injured myself several times, and I took an entire 30-count bottle of one of my prescriptions. I didn't even tell anyone that until we got to the ER. The state of Michigan had me committed, and it was the most horrible place I have ever been in my entire life. I worked as hard as I possibly could to get myself out of there. And when I did, I vowed that that was never going to happen to me or my family again. Since I couldn't find the help I wanted or needed in the medical community, I decided to go back to something that had always given me comfort before, which was writing. I started a blog that got very popular on the internet all over the world. Eventually, I started to feel so good that I was helping other people. Some days, people from Malaysia, Indonesia, lots of people from England, all over, they would write to me and say, I finally understand what my sister has. I finally understand what my daughter has. I know what I can tell my husband now. And I am proud to say that the story of how I got my life back is now on sale on Amazon.com. It's Not Your Journey is just that. It's my journey of how I had to damn near die to learn how to live again. I'm helping people, and it feels amazing. This book is for anyone. If you are depressed, if you're married to someone that is depressed, or if your child is depressed, it will give you insight that you could never have expected. I'm not here to sell books. I'm here to speak for those that can't speak for themselves anymore. The ones who are called cowards for taking the easy way out of life. The people that were in so much pain that they simply saw no other way out. They deserve a voice, and we all do.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. That is very brave. We really respect that. And if you would ever like to join us in anything we do, we would love to catch up with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
What was your first name? Rebecca. Rebecca, thank you. And I want to just touch on something when you talk about being in the hospital and that being clearly a terrible experience and life-changing, for you. I myself have not been comfortable with counseling and therapy, and it's been a really big challenge for me, medication and ECT, and I'm not going to get into the gamut of things, but I'm a huge advocate for that self-awareness and self-assessment. Not to say that we don't need medication and therapy, but and something I want to touch on too, when it comes to communities and helping ourselves, I'm not necessarily out here to save other people's lives. I used to think that, but now I feel like I want to say, I'm here to tell you that you have the power to save your own life, right? And find whatever tools that you have. And I know that maybe that sounds a bit naive, but given everything that I've seen and experienced, I feel like that's kind of where I'm coming from, and maybe you feel the same. And so anyways, thank you again for finding your light and for being a testament to all of this. So,
Thank you.
Since my loss, one of my pet peeves has become a seemingly innocuous question that people ask one another as they pass each other in the hallway or in the elevator, and that's how you doing. They don't expect an answer, a real answer. So when I ask that question, I work at a medical school. I see graduate students all the time, and when I ask, how you doing? They give the usual answer. I say, no, really, how are you doing? And then I get, I'm exhausted. I'm writing my thesis or whatever, and they'll, give me an honest answer about how they're doing. And I just wanted to share that it's important for us, if we care about one another, when we ask that question, mean it.
Hi. I have a resource table out here, but that's not what I'm talking about now. I wanted to share my story. I was 3 years old, and I was over at my cousin's house, and they got a phone call, and they screamed, cried, and locked me in a room with my baby cousin. Later, I found out that my cousin's father had just committed suicide. But that story didn't come to pass. I didn't know, or it wasn't in my awareness for a very long time what that was. All I knew was I remembered that I had to take care of this young baby, and I was 3 years old. And in that moment, I was like, I'm an adult, and I feel like I lost a lot of my childhood through that experience. It was really interesting how quickly that happens. So I feel like it shaped my career. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm an art therapist. I've worked in psychiatric units. And I was living in California doing, alternative therapies. And I come back here, and it just so happens that my child's main babysitter is the wife of my uncle who committed suicide. And I'm getting to know her now as an adult, so I feel, okay, we're having an established relationship. Maybe I can ask her a few questions about her relationship with this man who has shaped my life in this profound way. And all she can say is, well, he didn't have anything wrong with him. What do you mean? There was no mental illness. He's diagnosably, like I've diagnosed him, bipolar with psychotic features, based on my questioning and what was going on. Like, he's paranoid, he thinks the CIA is coming, and there's nothing wrong with him. And I find out that basically my entire family still believes that this huge event that happened that shaped everybody's lives in this profound way, they still believe that nothing was wrong with him, and that nothing is wrong with anything in the family line then. So they deny their depression, they deny their anxiety. So I'm just saying that because I feel like there is so much denial happening, and it's so important that we talk about these things and speak about them out loud. I certainly don't think that behavioral health and mental health care is up to par of where it should be. There's so many more conversations we need to be having. It's kind of frustrating and annoying to be working in the field and know that you are not offering what needs to be offered. But I just wanted to say that, and I just wanted to thank you for having this conversation, and for, this is very cutting edge, especially for this area. Like, I came from California, and in Michigan I have found it's not as progressive. So I think that it's pretty amazing here. So thank you, and yeah.
And thank you. I think that's why we're here. We definitely want to bring it out in the open. We don't want to hide it under a bushel. We want to reduce the stigma. We want to say this is something that we are going to talk about, and we are going to provide resources and information.
I would like to bring up the fact, is this on? Yeah. A little bit politics. There's something called parity, and we have parity federally, meaning mental health should be looked at the same as physical health. But unfortunately, in Michigan, we still do not have parity. And that's a real issue. And let's call this not necessarily mental illness, behavioral health, but a brain disease. For some people, it is a chemical imbalance of the brain. And let's try and get rid of the stigma if we can. And the Let's Talk does help. Just remember, stigma stinks.
And with that,
let me give you another resource also. I'm Todd Lipp, I'm the Director of Youth and Family Services here in Farmington Hills. And this past spring, we attended an unfortunate death of a young man here in our own community. And I have never, even though I do funerals myself, I've never seen a Catholic priest walk off the altar, come down into the crowd of young people and offer advice. That was a big step for me to see a Catholic priest do that. I don't know where people's faiths are, but God plays a big role in it. And there's a gentleman who's a priest. His name is Father Ron Rollheiser. He has done incredible work around the stigma of suicide, around talking about it, around understanding it. In fact, one of his writings in 2013 is Struggling to Understand Suicide. His name is Ron Rollheiser. I would strongly urge to pick up his stuff, to go online. Most of it is free that you can read. You don't have to buy his stuff. But his last name is spelled Rollheiser. And it's incredible things that he has put together, and it's really helped me to understand a little bit more where faith plays into this whole conversation also.
And with that, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Ken Massey.
Good evening, everybody. Ken Massey. I am the Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Farmington Hills, and I am also the chairperson of Farmington Safe and one of the founding members, obviously, of that organization. And I have the honor, questionable what it is, but to close this event, I want to thank our panelists. Our panelists did an absolutely awesome job, and it is very difficult to come and talk about something that is so painful and so personal. Thank you. You guys did a great job. And in my closing, which is, well, I'll keep it relatively short, but I want to bring up a couple of things. First of all, for the comment that we're doing something that a lot of communities in this area don't do. I appreciate that comment because this is a community that takes itself, we care about our residents and we care about our community. And we saw when we started, and in the opening comments that Anna shared with you, we saw a need and we decided that we were going to act on that need. And what you're seeing today is part of that process. So we've already done all this, but I just really, it's worth the points. Our issues here are destigmatizing this discussion of mental health. And those of us that are at City Council and that are working on this, we have a bully pulpit. We have a way of standing up in front of the community and saying, it's time to talk about mental health. And when we originally started this, we thought we didn't have enough resources. We have resources. What we didn't have was the ability to connect those people who needed them to the resources that are out there. And let's overcome the stigma. It's silly. You know, you don't hear people, and I think, Bridget, you brought up cancer. We don't say, it's cancer, get over it. You're a little depressed today, get over that. We need to be able to realize that we don't just become ill from the neck down. And that's a big piece of what it is. Farmington Safe is all about being here. I'm really glad to see new faces as well as a few faces of folks that have been here before. We're here for you. We're here for the community, and we want to keep this. We want to keep going. So what are we talking about? It's not going to tell me. But what this slide actually says, wow, gives me that, but a big box. Basically, talk about what? We're talking about things that are uncomfortable for people to talk about. This issue, talking about the word suicide, I had the honor to go to the National League of Cities last November and present Farmington Safe as a best practice. And by the way, it's being emulated in other cities in Michigan. There's a Grand Blanc Safe and a Royal Oak Safe and a Grosse Pointe Safe because they like what we're doing. But we need to talk about mental health, and we need to talk about suicide. And what's on this slide that you can't see is that 41,000 of our fellow Americans die by suicide every year. And the reason that there's a plane on there, that's essentially equivalent. If you put 200 people on a plane, you crash 3.5 of them every week. That's what that number means. It's time that we stop doing that. Can you imagine if planes were going down? You would never. Who would get on a plane if that was the potential outcome? So that's what this slide has on it. But I'm a scientist by training. Consequently, I'm more comfortable with the data pieces. So let me just, this graph here, which is based on some Centers for Disease Control statistics, show you that this problem is, unfortunately, and I think Cheryl touched on it, you know, there's payers and there's how the system is broken. But our system, we're failing. This is an issue that's getting worse. It's not getting better. That's why we're trying to do this. You're not expected to see this particular slide, but this breaks down by age group across the top, by age groupings, the ranking of the causes of death. And if you look at 15 to 24, 10 to 14s and 15 to 24, the green box is suicide, third leading cause. But then it jumps up for our 25 to 34-year-olds to being the second leading cause of suicide, or cause of death. There's issues out there. This is not going away without attention to it. So I could stand here all night because I'm very comfortable hiding behind the statistics. But I'll tell you, the national average, if you break it down per capita, national average is 12.94 deaths by suicide per 100,000 people. Michigan, we're a little bit better. We're only 12.74. So, wow, we're a little under the curve there. That said, here's the breakdown. This table actually goes on and on, hence all the dots, because suicide covers every race, every gender, every educational level, every income level. It's a problem. But tonight's discussion is on suicide, surviving that loss. So the statistic is when you've suffered a loss, it doesn't matter what those other numbers say, it's 100%. And that's daunting. That's for every suicide, the estimates that happen every 13.1 minutes, that leaves a family and friends questioning, as we've heard, why? What is it? Why did that happen? So I don't want you to take away messages that this is hopeless, because it isn't. I want you to take away a message that in a community that cares, a community that actually cares about each other, and it was brought up, if we're going to ask each other, how you doing today? Listen. There's a story about or two stories. One woman that was had intended to take her own life by suicide. She left in her note, I am going to walk to a bridge and I'm going to jump off that bridge, but if somebody stops and talks to me along the way, I won't do it. She is deceased. Nobody bothered to ask her. The flip side of that is the gentleman, there was a park police officer in California who dealt with the Golden Gate Bridge, and he's credited with saving a number of lives. And his number one way of interceding was he'd see somebody who looks questionable, something's going on, he would engage them in a conversation. And that engagement in that conversation actually changed people's minds. And that's what we need to be doing. So as a community that cares, we can change things. We can reduce the numbers. We can do that if we know that there's an issue. That's why I shared a few stats with you. If we have information, what do you do? Farmington Safe has sponsored community mental health first aid classes. We've done a number of these Safe Talk programs so that we can get information about what to do. We know in those classes and in the information that is handed out here on the resource tables, we have what to look for. What are the signs when somebody's depressed or undergoing issues? Because just like other diseases, there are early symptoms. If we know what those are, then we can identify them early. We also have to have the courage to ask the tough questions. If somebody is giving you answers or giving you information that seems it's not right, you have to have that courage to ask. Are you thinking about injuring yourself? Are you contemplating suicide? Ask the tough question. A lot of people want to bounce around that or ignore it. And then you have to know what to do depending on the answer you get. Because if you get an answer that says yes, then you need to know what to do. Again, I point to the resource tables out here. And something that we've heard from every speaker, from every panelist, from many of the audience questions, is we have to talk about it at the end of the day. And when Todd was making his comments, I was kind of hearkening back to the start of Farmington SAFE, or when we called it the Farmington Area Suicide Prevention Task Force, which is not a great acronym. I was thinking about, we wanted a logo. And we were kicking ideas around, and we met over at the fire station because we were kicked out of our normal room here. And we started saying, well, what should we, we'll talk about this, talk about. What we ended up with is, as you see on our logo, let's talk about it. And hearing what we're talking about this evening sounds like a stroke of brilliance. I'm very proud of this group that serves on Farmington SAFE. So in closing, truly, a community that cares about each other, we can make a difference. And it's time for us to stop the divisiveness that we have and step up and take that responsibility and realize that we have more things that bring us together than we have that put us apart or take us apart. And we have to help do that. We have to have the support of our friends and families for those who have had losses. And Jim, you actually mentioned keeping in touch with your son's friends. That was somewhat maybe selfish on your part, but you're helping them. They're helping you. And I will tell you, as somebody who's had a loss, the call that you get from your friend who remembers you on that trauma-versary, because anniversary is a good thing, trauma-versaries aren't, that call means a lot. The other thing, and I believe the question was brought up over here and it was talked about a little bit, is guys have to stop hiding behind our macho BS because it's fake anyway. And I will tell you, the most uncomfortable thing, when I get choked up here, it's very uncomfortable for me. I'm still not comfortable with that. But we have to stop it. We have to have that give and take. We're real. So another thing that was said that I want to echo in here in summary is we're not going to know why. So let that question go. We don't know why people get cancer either. You know, we know a little bit about heart disease, but you know, you don't always know why those things happen, but we don't ask. Molly, you touched on anger. I thought you did a very good job about talking about anger. And we have to realize that we can be angry at that person who did that. We can be angry at the cause, but we don't love the person any less. So it's there. That to me meant, that meant a lot. Stephanie, we hadn't met before tonight, but your comment about knowing that your father lived a full life, instead of focusing on how somebody died. You don't go to a funeral of somebody who had a massive heart attack at age 88 and question, wow, you know, had he not done all those things in the previous 87 years, he would have been fine, you know, because now he's just a heart attack victim. No, we talk about people and the life they live. Todd talked about the dash when he shared about the story. For those of you who probably are familiar with it, there is a poem essentially called The Dash, and it's not about it's focused on headstones. And you got the year of birth and you got the year of death and that little dash in between. It's not about those dates. It's about how you lived your life in the middle of that dash. Those are important things to say. So in summary, the last kind of little image that really meant something to me as I was thinking about my closing comments, and it's been said all the way around, and Bridget, you brought it up, is that no matter what path you think you take, and grieving is a path, it could be a nice fork in the road, it can be a very curvy path, it's your path. We who have had those losses are here to support each other. We have to depend on each other. We have to depend on our families and realize that that path is not a single, straight, linear line. It can be convoluted and everything, but as we go through that path and we go through the process, you want to get to the enlightened piece, which says that you too can survive because you have your life to live. And that's one of the important things that I want everybody who is here today. This should be a message of hope. You're not alone. People who have gone through this are not alone. But we need to support each other, get through that pathway, and ultimately realize that we have to continue on with our lives. I appreciate you coming out. This organization tries to do these community conversations on a fairly frequent basis. It's already been alluded to that we have some other things that we do as well. We are supported by the Memorial Fund, which is the Graham Smith Memorial Fund, so named for my stepson. And it is the only source of income for the Farmington Safe. We don't do anything that's not tax supported or anything else. So just want folks to know that it's the kindness, it's bringing people together that's important. With that, thank you very much for attending. Hope you got a lot out of this evening. Let's thank the panelists one more time. Thank Luke. Luke did an absolutely awesome job getting us kicked up, and as did Anna. And to all my SAFE members that are here, thank you very much. It's a great organization. It's proud to be working with you.